Hello everyone, this is Satyaprakash. In this session we will learn what is the role and importance of check constraint in SQL Server. So I will suggest before going through this session, please visit my previous video session based on Cascading Referential Integrity Constraint in SQL Server. You can find this link in my description section. So let's learn what the um, roles and importance of check constraint in SQL Server. So in this session we'll learn that what is check constraint and what the steps to add and implement the check constraint in SQL Server, and what is the role of check constraint in case of null value. So first we learn that is what is check constraint. So check constraint is used to limit the range of values so that it allows the user to insert records between those values, and it restricts the user if the value does not satisfy the limit rules. So the meaning of this sentence is, if you have a column that is age in trivial% table, then the user cannot insert the negative values, or if you mention any conditions that is it should not be on the range of values, that is age. So I implemented the age should not less than 0 and it should not be on the 200. So in SQL Server, check constraint can be created using below steps. That is, first step I will show you how it is created using graphically or by using the or designer, and second one is using SQL query. So null case in check constraint. So what is the null case in check constraint? It is the most important point that is mentioned below, that since a column it is a nullable column. So I have described already in my previous session, that is I have implemented one table that is trivial%. There is a column called age column. It is a nullable column. So it is possible to pass null for this column when inserting a row. So when you pass a null for the nullable column, the boolean expression evaluates to unknown and it allows that value. So it means if you implement the check constraint using the age column and it is a nullable column, if you pass the null value for this column, then the check constraint allows this null value to insert into the for the age column. So there is no restriction at all. So go to my SQL Server. So I'll show you by syntax. So I need to create a new page. Okay, so I suggest you, before go through this session, first visit my previous one and that link added in the description link. Okay, now come to the subject. Okay, let's say we have an integer age column in a table and the age in general cannot be less than 0, and at the same time it cannot be greater than 200. I will implement this condition using check constraint. But since age is an integer column, it can accept negative value and the values much greater than 200. So to limit this value that can be added, we can use the check constraint. So that's the reason why we use the check constraint. So in SQL Server, check constraint can be created graphically or using a SQL query. So the same table I have used here, that is select star from trivial%. So I have implemented the check constraint in the age column, that is the age, this one. So I'll show you insert a negative value in the age column of tbl person. I think there is no, I have not added any constraints, so I'll show what are the result behind it. 30 for name I'll be add dev, and for email is dev.g @gmail.com, and for gender ID it is 2, and for age I have inserted that in -98, and for int underscore whatever you want. But the main aim it is this -98 should not be inserted to the age column because it is invalid, but it allows because I have not implemented the check constraint. So let's see what is happening. Okay, I'll show you that is 14. Okay, so select star from tbl person where id tbl person where id equal to 14th. See here, the age is -98 value is inserted the age column, and that is invalid. For that reason, we'll check the check constraint. So a constraint is nothing but a boolean expression, and which returns a true or false, that is 0 or 1. 0 or 1. So our aim is the age column should not allow the value less than 0 and greater than 200. So how to achieve this? In two ways, that is graphically using designer. So I'll show you here using graphically. So expand the table tbl person, and here the constraint, new constraint. Here the constraint name is by default it is ck underscore tbl person, and the expression here I have to add it. So age column less than 0 and age greater than age should be greater than 0 and it is less than 150. I have 200. Okay, age greater than 0 and age less than 200. Okay, now click OK. Now close this. You save this table. Now it's showing that is unable to add the constraint. The alter table statement conflicted with the check constraint ck underscore tbl person. The conflict occurred in database satyadb table tbl person column age because there is already there is a invalid data, that is a -98. That's why it is showing this error, that is conflicted is occurred. So to do this, first I need to delete this record, that is id 14. So what I'll do that is delete from table person where id equal to 14th. So it is successfully deleted. So again I need to create the constraint. Refresh this one. Okay, now I have to create a new one. Okay, now I have a constraint I have to implement here. Age that is greater than 0 and age less than 200. Click one, close. Now it is saved properly, and if you go to constraint here, refresh, see here the constraint is created, that is ck underscore tvl person. Actually this constraint name I forgot to modify, then I had to delete this one. Okay, now I have to create again. So here you should mention a meaningful constraint name, that is ck underscore tvl person, and I have mentioned the underscore age, that is underscore column, for better meaningful constraint name. So age less than 0, greater than 0, and age less than 200. Age greater than 0 and age less than 200. Okay, now close. See here, the constraint is created under ck underscore tvl person underscore age. Okay, now try to execute few queries so that we'll check and how far the constraint it works. Now we'll check here, already this value is not there. I have to execute again. See here, the insert statement conflicted with the check constraint, that is ck underscore tvl person underscore age, and the conflict occurred in the database and the column is age because it should not allow the -98 value. Okay, that is the issue one, and we need to insert a valid data, that is 98. So we need to execute this. One row is affected and it is successfully inserted also. See here, so valid data is successfully inserted, and we already have I already have told you about the negative value, it should not inserted, and the valid data it is inserted at 98. Let's check about the null value. So for null value, what I do is I need to create a new statement, that is 15, and it is I mentioned dev1 dev1g, and it is 1, and I mentioned here null. So let's check should the check constraint allows null to this column or not. So one row is affected, so it successfully allows to insert the null value to the AS column. So see here, dev1 and the AS column allows null. So if you check here, it is because if you check here the column is age, that is not it allows null value, it allows null value, that's why check constraint for null value for check is unknown, that's why boolean expression allows the null value, and the check constraint allows the null value to be inserted to the S column. So go to my Excel sheet. So here we have already mentioned that is a column is a nullable column, then it is possible to pass null for this column when inserting rows. So when you pass a null for the nullable column, the boolean expression evaluates to unknown and it allows the value. So that about the null value, it accepted by the check constraint. So the check constraint allows the null value because a boolean expression returns an unknown result, in which case the constraint allows null to be inserted. So flip to my SQL Server. So here I'll tell you how to drop a constraint. Okay, so to drop a constraint, there is a query called, you need to alter table tvl person drop constraint. In the constraint name you should mention ck underscore tbl person underscore age. So command successfully executed. If you refresh this constraint section, that this constraint is removed successfully, that is ck underscore tbl person underscore age. So that's the details we can achieve using graphically. So next step I will show you how to achieve this result using SQL query. So to achieve the SQL query, what we will do is there is a SQL query called alter table tbl person add constraint. What the name of the constraint you want to mention? ck underscore tbl person. The age column will be affected. Check what inside check what we mentioned, the expression greater than 0 and age less than 200. Age greater than 0 and age less than 200. I need to mention this one, the speed for better visible. Age greater than 0 and age less than 200. So that all about the query, how to create the check constraint in SQL Server. Alter table name, add constraint name, and check inside check what expression you want to add. So it's successfully created. You just refresh this constraint. You'll check here ck underscore tbl person underscore age. So to check this query it is working or not, we have few queries here and we need to execute. And okay, now what I did is I just added the wrong name here. Okay, now tbl person is ck underscore tbl person underscore age, correct. So if you refresh tbl ck underscore tbl person underscore age, so to check this constraint it actually working or not, we have few queries to execute. So it's the same query I need to copy here. In 3 ways we need to check. One is invalid query, another is valid query, and next one is using null, as we have done this exactly on graphically method. So we just check what is the last column id value in tbl person. So we'll check here, that is the last value was 15. So here I need to mention the 16 here. I mentioned here Satya and satya dot gmail satya gmail, and 98 instead of 98 I mentioned here 21 minus 21 and 2. Execute. So it throws an issue, that is the statement is conflicted with the check constraint, that is ck underscore person underscore age, that is what we have already created using SQL query here. So it is working fine. And check with the valid record. So we need to execute this, remove the minus marking. So it is affected, that is 16 is already inserted properly. So if you check here, so 16 id value is properly inserted. So okay, now I want to add 210. because our age should be less than 200, so we need to check. I just update the row with 17. Check here, it's conflicted because it beyond the 200, that's why. So our value is already inserted the 60 with invalid data. So we already have checked invalid in case of less than in case of less than 0 and in case of greater than 200. So let's check about the null value, and with using check constant, that is in the SQL query we have created the check constraint. So we have to update the ID, that is 18. So we'll check here. So it is inserted properly. So we need to check here, that is 18. So it is successfully inserted, that is a null value in the S column. So these two values are successfully inserted, that is using the SQL query we have created the check constant, and these two values we have inserted during the creation of check constraint using graphically. So that all about the check constraint using query and as well as using our graphically. And it's I have already have that told shown you with few examples using few insert statements, and I I have shown you about the insert statement using the valid data, that is using less than 0 and or greater than the limit value, that is 200. So it should not allow because it is beyond the limit, and it violates the check constant rule, and that's why. And next one is using valid records, the insert statement is properly successfully executed. And in case of null value, how check constraint reacts. So go to my sheet. So again I just told you check constraint is that we already have learned the check constraint, what is check constraint, and what are the how many ways we have created, and in case of null how check constraint reacts, and a boolean expression how to evaluate the null unknown value, that is, and how it allows the value. And using check constraint we have learned about the how insert statement throws an exception or the check constraint is conflicted when the user inserted the invalid data to the column of a table, that is be less than 0 or greater than the limit value, that is 200. And in case of null value how it reacts. So that is the roles of the check constraint. We can add the conditions for specific column, and if the user wants to add some conditions restrictions, it restricts the user to insert the values between those specific specific initial and final value. So it is like a validation. So that's why so user cannot insert the invalid data to the column of specific table which have implemented during the creation of check constraint. So this is my YouTube channel, Coding Knowledge. Subscribe this and get the up-to-date tutorial and session on YouTube about the .NET, .NET Core, MVC, Angular, Azure Data Factory, Azure SQL Server database, Entity Framework. So subscribe this and share with your close friends, pioneers, and all of your that is colleagues. So in summary part we have learned the below details, that is what is check constraint and what are the steps to add and implement the check constraint in SQL Server, role of check constraint in case of null value. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you for listening and have a great day.